Okay. Thank you so much, everybody, for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us for this 30-minute lunch and learn on supporting college students post-COVID. My name is Simone Figueroa, and I am the president of You Thrive Educational Services. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with our organization, I wanted to share a little bit about what we do. We provide mental and emotional wellness programs for college students rooted in the fields of mindfulness, positive psychology, and self-compassion. And our programs are designed to help college students manage stress, become more resilient, and thrive throughout their undergraduate experiences and beyond. And we are so honored to be joined by our wonderful guest, Dr. Tim Urdan. Tim is, he's been a professor at Santa Clara University since 1996. And before that, he was an assistant professor at Emory University in the Division of Educational Studies for 2 years before moving to Santa Clara University. Dr. Urdan received his PhD from the combined program in educational psychology at the University of Michigan, his master's in education at Harvard, and his bachelor's in psychology at the University of California, Berkeley. His research areas include academic motivation, adolescent development, cultural and ethnic identity, and adaptive educational environments. Tim currently lives in Berkeley with his 2 children. And before I turn it over to Dr. Urdan, who is also one of our esteemed contributors in our programs, I just wanted to go over a few housekeeping items. Please feel free to use the chat. We want to keep this very engaging. And if you have any questions, it's easier for us to track it in the Q&A function. So if you can submit questions there, that would be great as well. And with that, I will turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks very much, Simone. Can you hear me okay?
We hear you great.
Great. Okay. I just had to switch over to the earphones because my neighbor chose this moment to break out the leaf blower. So it's very noisy over there. Thanks so much for inviting me. I'm really excited to discuss this topic with everybody. During the pandemic, we've had a lot of sort of changes and different approaches to try to teach, and students have had to go through several different adaptations of how they engage with their classes. And it became clear to me, and then in my discussions with my colleagues, that there seems to have been a real shift in how students are engaging with school. Issues involving attendance and turning in work on time or coming to class having done the readings, all these things seem to have really changed over the last couple of years. And it's become something that I think is of interest to me, but also something that I think we need to really look at and figure out how to address in an open way. So that's the topic of this discussion today. And I'm going to invite you all to join in with your ideas and questions as we go along. So if you've got a question, feel free to add it to the Q&A. And at some point or a couple points during this talk, I'm going to ask you maybe just to throw some things in the chat, your ideas in the chat. So first, let me share my screen. Okay, so the title of this conversation is Supporting College Students Post-COVID. And here's a little framing of the problem. There seems to be a pretty widespread perception that the return to normal has not been smooth for students. So coming out of the year or two of online instruction and back to face-to-face, I know that my colleagues and I were all really looking forward to sort of getting back to normal. But we pretty quickly noticed that it didn't feel like normal, even though we were back to face-to-face instruction. Faculty are reporting high levels of student absenteeism, of missing assignments, and of disengagement in class. Some of this, excuse me, is anecdotal, and some of this is being discussed in wider forums. The Chronicle of Education has had a few articles about this. And I don't know if there's been real systematic research on how students are engaged in college classrooms, but there has been some research about rising levels of students' stress, anxiety, and confusion during and post-COVID. This is all coming on top of rising levels of anxiety and other mental health challenges that faculty and staff and researchers have noticed among students for several years. So there's been a bit of an explosion in students seeking mental health services on campuses across the country. And the most frequent mental health challenge that students are facing is rising levels of anxiety and stress. So I want to discuss possible causes of this and then possible solutions. So first, why is this happening? And I wanted to invite you to just throw your ideas in the chat about why this might be happening in the first place. I'll give you a minute or so to put any ideas you might have for why we might be seeing rises in students' disengagement in college classrooms. Yeah, so some ideas are changes in habits, lack of opportunity to engage in, to develop social skills through interaction, lack of socialization, some flexible policies regarding attendance and maybe due dates for things, loss of learning leading to disengagement, struggling socially, a lot of students feeling overwhelmed, and I know that that goes for faculty as well, feeling overwhelmed. Lack of tolerance for frustration, and then kind of an overwhelming sense of dread just by the steady flood of bad news in social media and the news. And then difficulty sort of changing back and forth between different formats. Okay, so I think most of these ideas are reflect, what I was thinking as well, and what other people have said that have written about this topic. One, the format of school has changed. So students went from face-to-face to online to hybrid, and now mostly face-to-face, although I know when I was teaching last year, I was teaching mostly face-to-face, but had to have some flexibility for students that got sick. So there was some online, and it was just a challenge for faculty and for students. Second, the rules of school changed a bit during COVID. A lot of instructors at all levels of schooling became more flexible with regarding due dates. Attendance policies became more flexible. So the rules changed a bit during COVID and since. I would argue that most current students have never really had the chance to get the hang of college. So I think that we've recognized that there's sort of a learning curve for students as they transition from high school into college. And it takes a while, maybe the first year or so, to really kind of understand the pacing of college. Most students, this is their first opportunity to live outside of the house, kind of understanding how college works. And most of our students now either entered college during COVID or have been in college since we've been transitioning during the last 3 years of COVID. So it's kind of taken away students' opportunity to really get a feel for how college works and how it's supposed to flow. 4, uncertainty contributes to stress anxiety in a sense that there's no purpose. So COVID has just added a layer of uncertainty to what for this generation of students has already been a sense that they're not sure what's going to happen in the future. I think the political climate, climate change, a lot more emphasis on being the perfect student to get into the perfect school. All of these things have created a sense of uncertainty about the future, and that's contributed to stress levels of students. So you find more students, I think, than before kind of saying, what's the point? Whereas this deadline for a paper in class maybe seemed like the most important thing for a lot of students 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. Today, I think there's more students that are saying, how important is this paper really in the bigger scheme of things? And maybe wondering whether going to school, doing well in school, getting assignments in on time is really all that important. Does this paper really matter? I think contributing to this also is just the sense that faculty and staff are also overwhelmed and stressed. It's difficult. The whole transition to online learning was a brand new thing for a lot of instructors. And I think a lot of us are just feeling overwhelmed ourselves, which changes our approach to teaching and our approach to students. Yeah, somebody also added to the chat that there's a question about really the value of higher education given the costs and the changes in the job market, where students can get good jobs sometimes without having to pay for college. Okay, so let's shift now to discussing ways of possibly addressing this crisis, if you want to call it that. I don't like the word crisis, although we see it all the time. But there does seem to be something going on. So let's think about how we might address this. So I'm going to invite you again to pop ideas into the chat, and I'll give you a minute or two. What should we do to address this current problem? Any ideas you have, feel free to throw those in the chat. All right. One idea is focus more on building community inside and outside the classroom. It's a good idea. Access to mental health services. Absolutely. Orientation classes to build back these missing skills. Yep. Normalize the struggle to encourage help-seeking behavior. Yep. But students know that this is a common issue that a lot of students are going through. Acknowledge the difficulty of the transition. Focusing on promoting and building social skills. Good. 30 more seconds if anybody else wants to add. More education for faculty, staff about student mental health. Absolutely. Allow more flexibility and ability to shape their area of study around their interests. Acknowledging the issue is key and that students aren't alone. Communicate expectations with understanding need for flexibility and connect them to mentors in upper level classes who've experienced both remote and in classroom learning. Okay, extended orientation for first years, good. And again, I think that you touched on several of the concepts that I am going to promote as well. First one that I wanted to mention is a focus on structure. And I think that there's some controversy around this because I think structure is sometimes thought of as being synonymous with sort of demandingness. And it's got some similarities, but it's different. If one of the issues that students are struggling with is really figuring out how to organize their time, how to adapt to the classroom environment and college, it really helps to have a clear communication and sort of set of procedures that students can understand up front and use that to build their own time management, their own self-regulation into that. So to the extent that instructors and staff can really clearly articulate what the structure is of the classroom or of the school or where to find resources, all of these things to help students develop a set of time management and self-regulation skills, I think that will help reduce some of the uncertainty that students are currently experiencing. So clear expectations of students with support will help reduce the anxiety associated with uncertainty. Second idea is some more explicit instruction for students about learning to learn. So this has been an idea that's been promoted for decades. Actually, one of my mentors created a whole learning to learn course for first-year college students. And I think that this is an idea that will help students really sort of adapt to college when they get there. What are effective study strategies? How do you take notes effectively? How do you space out learning so that it's not all crammed? Remember that many students have never really learned how to succeed in college. And for those students that entered college when using a remote learning platform, this made it more difficult for students to figure out how to succeed in college, especially when living outside of the home. So having a "this is how you college" class would be helpful for a lot of students. Providing explicit instruction on time management, on study skills, on spaced learning, on short-term and long-term goals. Right now, a lot of universities do this in a hit or miss fashion, where some faculty are talking about it and some aren't, but having an explicit class or instruction for faculty about how to do this might be helpful for students. An emphasis on mental health for all. I know that at my university, this has been a problem for years, partly just with staffing, finding mental health professionals that were available has been a problem. So a greater emphasis has been placed on that at my university, and I think at a lot of universities. And when I say mental health for all, I mean for students, partly through mental health services that all students can access if needed, but partly also something that instructors can do, where they're fostering a sense of belonging, a sense of safety, a sense of open communication in the classroom. And as several of you have suggested, this sort of safety and open communication can involve an acknowledgement that times are difficult, that it's a stressful period right now, that a lot of students and faculty are going through this together. So trying to create a sense of community in the classroom. Oops, sorry. Outside of class, normalizing discussions and support for mental health. So how do we create some sort of safe space for people to openly discuss the challenges that they are having with their anxiety, with their stress, with depression, so that it doesn't marginalize students who feel like they are struggling, or faculty or staff. I mean, this is an issue for the entire university community, and trying to make it more of a normal process for people to discuss mental health and to seek mental health resources, I think would be useful. There's a discussion in the chat asking, would I be willing to share a syllabus for peer mentor created used for learning to learn course? Yeah, I don't teach a learning to learn course, but I've got friends who do. So I could get a syllabus for that and share that with Simone, and she could share that out. Okay. want to close the presentation part with just a mention of a few different places to read more about this. The discussions about student anxiety and stress and mental health, there's a lot of stuff about that that is been available for years. But this specific issue of increasing levels of student disengagement and student disconnection, it's been a more recent phenomenon. And here's a few articles related to that. Two from the Chronicle of Higher Education and one from EdSurge. I'm sure there's more out there, but I just found these in a quick search. Okay, so that is it for the presentation part. I'd love to open it up for questions and discussion. Hi, Simone.
Hi, Tim. That was really awesome. So much great information. And I love that the chat's been really active thus far. And so, yes, we're just going to allow some dedicated time to kind of continue the conversation. So if you have any questions, please feel free to, I guess, continue to put them in the chat or put them in the Q&A. And any thoughts that you have on how we can continue to support students.
I've got a question for the audience. I'm just wondering if other people feel like they're seeing the same thing. Right now, this is mostly sort of anecdotal, people saying that they feel like this is what they're noticing. Is this something that others are seeing as well? Okay, so several people have said, yes, they are. They're seeing this where they are. One person asked if we know of any resources for faculty to teach learning how to learn within their classes more indirectly. So not necessarily having a separate dedicated class for this. I know that there's teaching and learning centers at a lot of universities that have strategies for how to build this into your own class. There's a teaching and learning center at the University of Michigan that was one of the first of these. And there's a good book, it's pretty old, but it's been updated, called Teaching Tips. And a lot of that book is dedicated to how to promote learning to learn ideas within your own classroom rather than having a separate dedicated class. So that's one resource that comes to mind, is Teaching Tips by William McKeechee. And then there's other ideas coming up in the chat. Somebody says the work of Sandra McGuire. I don't know Sandra's work, but if you want to contact me, I can send you to some links and some resources. My email, I'll pop it in the chat. Okay, and there's some other good ideas coming up in the chat about, somebody put in a link to Teaching Tips. Other ideas that are going in the chat, requiring certain topics for new students, like first-year seminar study skills. I think that there are some universities that are doing that, and I think that that's a good idea. I really do think students need to learn how to study for college classes and how that differs. For, most students have had some success in high school, but it's a different approach in college. When Simone introduced me, she said, I live in Berkeley with my 2 children, which I think I used to, but now both of my kids are off in college, and it's been fun well, not fun. It's fun and stressful to watch them sort of figure out how college is different. They really had high school down. They'd figured out their strategies, and then they had to adjust when they got to college. So I like this idea of having a class to teach students how to adapt to the college classroom. Engagement in virtual classes specifically. This is an interesting issue as we all move to sort of online teaching for a year. There were some universities that have been teaching exclusively online for years, and some of them sort of enjoyed watching the face-to-face people how to figure out how to catch up. So in the third resource that I mentioned, and I'll put this link in the chat, they talk about that specifically. How do you help students become engaged or stay engaged online? It's definitely a challenge. And just a couple of tips. One is that you have more frequent sort of check-in emails with students. And some universities that have been entirely online for years have dedicated staff and kind of instructional coaches that reach out to faculty and just check in, say, you know, can I help you with anything? How's it all going? Others have developed sort of response bots that are sort of these chat bots that cue students to ask questions so that it keeps them engaged, and then the faculty can read through these chat questions and respond. I'm just going to put a link to this this article into the chat because it specifically discusses some strategies for engagement in online classes. There's some other ideas that folks have added to the chat as well. Okay. Other questions?
I think we have time for one more if anybody has a last minute question.
All right.
Okay. So with that, I'll just share my screen. And let's put it in slideshow mode. So thank you so much, Dr. Urdan, for taking time to come on today and spark this awesome discussion among higher education professionals and share all your wisdom and knowledge and everything that you're seeing and some practical tips and tools that people can hopefully integrate or take back to their community. If you are interested in receiving that syllabus, if Dr. Urdan's able to get his hands on after speaking to some colleagues, please don't hesitate to send me an email and I'll be sure to connect with you and get you that information. And also, if you are interested in learning more about the work that we do at You Thrive Educational Services and how we can help support college students, we are hosting a 30-minute info webinar tomorrow at the same time, 12 to 12:30 Eastern. I will drop a registration link in the chat and we hope to see you there. And if not there, then at our other events. And we, again, thank you for your time and hope that you found this beneficial and informative. I don't know if you have any last parting words that you wanted to share, Dr. Urdan.
No, I just want to thank everybody for joining and for sharing your ideas in the chat. It's really, really helpful and useful to see how you're thinking about this issue as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much and have a great day, everybody.